From Nashville's WSM Radio, the original home of the Grand Ole Opry, this is a Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast.
Hey, it's Charlie Matos, and in this episode of our Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast, longtime journalist Tim Ghianni joins us. Terrific new book, Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky-Tonk Heroes. It features a preface by Country Music Hall of Famer Bobby Bare and a foreword by our late great friend Peter Cooper. Hope you enjoy our Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast with Tim Ghianni.
Tim Ghianni, sit down. Where Mo Bandy and Brett Kissel have been sitting.
It's an honor to be sitting here, of course, with you folks, legendary folks. But listening to Mo Bandy and his guys do this last couple of numbers was great.
Well, you have authored a new book. That's what you do.
That's what I do. Right? All right, Bill.
Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky-Tonk Heroes. I always, as soon as I say that, I want to say, like me, to quote Billy Joe Shaver, as sung by Waylon Jennings.
That's right.
My personal time with Music City friends and legends in rock and roll, R&B, and a whole lot of country. And that's borne out by the fact that Bobby Bare wrote the preface to your
Bobby
book.
Bare is one of my dear friends. We consider ourselves best of friends, and he did write the preface. He also got an early copy, a manuscript copy to look at.
And you got a chapter.
He got a chapter on Bobby, and he actually is almost he's the first episode in this book as well, from back in 1972 when I first met Bobby. So yeah, so he got a chapter. He liked his chapter.
He's chapter one, as a matter of fact.
He is chapter one. He is chapter. He belongs at chapter one because he actually sets the course of the book. So.
And your friendship with the late Peter Cooper, as he has written the foreword for your book.
Yes, Peter.
How did you get to know Peter?
Well, Peter, I hired him. I know he's been familiar with you. I hired Peter. I was the entertainment editor at the Tennessean for a long time, and I needed a new chief music writer, senior music writer. And so I was advertising, media advertising, to find somebody. And Peter, who was working at the newspaper in Spartanburg, South Carolina at the time, he answered. He was actually a teacher at that point. He left the newspaper. But anyway, he answered the advertisement. So he called me, and I had him come on up to Nashville. And as soon as he sat down with me in the interview, I knew I knew he was just such a nice, kind gentleman, and I knew right away that he would be the one. He'd be the one. Now I had to interview other people, but I offered Peter the job by the end of the day. And there was one thing that's interesting. You probably you would know about Jason and the Scorchers. I have to tell you this real quickly, but Peter. Our librarian at the Tennessean was Perry Baggs, who was the drummer for Jason and the Scorchers, the legendary country rock band. Uh-huh. And so Peter his favorite band of all time was Jason and the Scorchers. And so I'm interviewing Peter in the interview room, and we're walking out, and he said, "Hey, Tim," or Mr. Ghianni. I said, "No, call me Tim." He said, Is that Perry Baggs from Jason and the Scorchers?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, I got to meet him. Perry's in the library. Library, of course, they used to cut the clips and file the photos. And I said, "Peter, I'll introduce you to him, but we got to go downstairs and get you signed up. We got 5 o'clock to get through the HR department." So I said, "Here's Perry," and they shook hands. I said, "We'll be back, Perry." And Peter he was more excited about meeting Perry Baggs than he was at getting the job. His little brother told me a few weeks ago that Peter, when he got back to Spartanburg, the first thing he did was tell his wife, or his future wife, about meeting Perry Baggs. And then he said, "Oh, I got the job too." So and he worked for me for a number of years till they went to the Hall of Fame.
How long did it take for you to realize that deep down inside there was a singer-songwriter, Peter Cooper, too?
It was an interesting thing. I knew pretty quickly because I knew the people he was hanging around, and I knew that there was a soulfulness about Peter. And he started bringing me very early on CDs that he'd burned. I mean, they weren't like commercial CDs, just that he was fiddling with. And it was such good, soulful stuff. I mean, it wasn't polished at that point. It took a lot of polishing on stage, polishing and studio polishing. But yeah, he was. I don't go out much anymore, being fairly old, at night. But I went to all of Peter's. He was with Pete by himself, and he was with Eric Brace and Tom Utes also. Mm-hmm. And other shows also, and I went to most of his shows for years. So yeah, he was a good fellow. In fact, my son, who's 27 or 28 now, he I would take him with me. And his favorite band, now I've taken him with me to see the Rolling Stones, I've taken him with me to see The Who, and we've seen some other big country acts. But he said his favorite band is Peter Cooper, Eric Brace, Peter Cooper, and Tom Utz. He said, so yeah, I think that's pretty good.
Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
That's right.
Nashville, right?
Speaks well for all of those fellas. Of course, my son loved Peter. We were very close.
I think we all did.
You know, Tim, when I came to town, I remember talking to people, and your name would come up, and they would be like, "Oh, Tim." You know, you were the high water mark, and still are. I remember seeing what you were doing at the Tennessean. And then when you put out your first book, I thought, oh my gosh, you remember so much of what was happening. Are you keeping journals? Because we get to talk to so many people, and I feel like a lot of it slips through the cracks, and I forget some of these great stories. How do you recollect all of them?
Most of them so far are okay. They're stored up in my head. But I do have in my computer and also in notebooks. Now, for this book, Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky-Tonk Heroes, I actually still had old notebooks from interviews with these fellas, and then I had notes in my computer. When I interview folks from home, I just type it into the computer. And so I had all kinds of notes, and also if I come back from it, like most of these folks in this book, I'd interviewed for a publication of some sort. Mm-hmm. And so I would always have their notes, their notebooks, and when I would come back from interview, I would write down other things that I noticed in case I ever did want to make use of some of that later, which I long ago was figured I would do a book similar to this. It just, I wasn't sure. So I have an awful lot of notes in my computer and stacks of computer printouts and stacks up here.
All right,
well, the thing that you've always done so beautifully is you treat people that you find at a meet and three just as eloquently as you would treat an interview with Chris Christopherson.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, that's my whole thing. My whole writing career was based on the idea that we're more alike than different, and we all have the same hopes, dreams, fears, ambitions, etc. And so I used to do a lot of columns, like you said, in the meet and threes, or just see somebody sitting on a porch, just stop and talk to them. And most people have a story if you're kind enough and interested enough to sit down and share it with them. So most of my people over the years, other than the celebrities, of course, but most of the people over the years, I would get them. I would just walk up and start introduce myself and ask them if they'd like to talk with me for a while, and that's how those were. But they're every bit as important as the celebrities. The everyday people are always. I love them all, and unfortunately, wandering around Nashville now, I used to wander around and just see people, but sitting on porches. But now, where these people lived, now they're all, I know it's progress, but they're all high rises and condos and all that stuff, where there used to be nice little porches and people sitting on their porches. So I miss that. But
where'd you grow up, Tim?
I grew up in Chicagoville, in the Chicago area, Deerfield, which is right across the street from Chicago, actually, literally across the street from Cook County. And but I came down here, my folks, I went to Iowa State University, and my parents moved to Nashville. My father's company relocated to Nashville in 1972. And so when I was still in college, my last summer in college, I came down to Nashville. And at that point, I knew it was going to be where I was going to stay around here. I worked in Clarksville up the road for a while also, but I knew that my folks were here. But I really liked Nashville right away. In fact, Bill, the first in this book, the first incident really is when I met Bear, and I was out one night. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I hope I'm not taking too long. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was down near the intersection of 5th and Broadway. And of course, 5th then was just a horrible. I mean, Broadway was pretty run down also. But 5th, going toward where the Hall of Fame is and the arena is now, that was just parking lots or empty lots. And so I decided the next day Nashville was going to pave over the brick roads. They were all brick roads down there. And so I decided at 1 o'clock in the morning, you use a lot of your best sense at 1 in the morning. But I decided I was going to take some of those bricks with me. So I opened up the trunk of my car. And I figured this was not vandalism. They were going to be covered over the next day. And so I figured, well, Hank Williams and those people walked on those bricks. So I got a screwdriver out of my trunk, and I just started popping up bricks and then pulling when they're loose too. So I was stacking them in the trunk of the old Falcon. I drove 65 Falcon, and as I'm doing that, there's voices come out of the distance. I see them coming through the haze on Fifth, Fifth South, coming toward me, toward that corner. And they said, they said, "Hey, fella, what are you doing?" I explained what I was doing, and they said, and Bear says something to the effect, "Well, that sounds like a really good idea." And Shel Silverstein was with them. They'd been recording that night. I think it was during the time of the Lullabies, Legends, and Lies recording, or it may have been one of the earlier things, but it was at that time, '72. And so Bear and Shel started loading my trunk with bricks with me. So that was so. Ever since then, that was he's been my friend. We didn't make friends that night because I had other things to do. But I always, when I talked to him over the years, when I first reintroduced myself to him to write something about him, I talked about that story, telling him that story. He's faintly remembers that he and Shel were on their way to Tootsie's, and I don't know if they were going to go meet Roger Miller or Willie or somebody like that at Tootsie's, but they stopped for probably close to half an hour. They were just popping bricks into my trunk, and it was really kind of cool. And so I love Bear.
Well, chapter 1, he also does the preface for the book. It's Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky-Tonk Heroes. Tim Ghianni is with us this morning. We'll continue. We're going to talk about Chapter 4. That's Chris Christopherson when we come back on 650 AM WSM and Circle Television. Country plays here.
The silver-tongued devil and I.
It's Coffee, Country, and Cody. There are 33 chapters in Tim Ghianni's book, Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky-Tonk Heroes. And Chapter 4 goes to Chris Christopherson, Pick Up the Silver-Tongued Devil story.
Well, Chris was my, actually, when I was growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, I bought I read about the Silver-Tongued Devil and album and about Chris's background, which was so interesting. I don't need to go into that. But when I came down here in '72, my first goal, I thought, was I'm going to meet Chris Christopherson. I really loved his writing. And in fact, when I was in college, everybody else was playing the rock of the day. I was playing all of Chris's records, plus the Beatles records, of course. But so I started wandering around. He was in the phone book then still. It was back in the days when he was at like 1717 17th Avenue South. And so I went by there, and I won't go on too long, but I never found him there. But Bob Beckham had his office next door, and Chris's albums were all framed on the wall. You could see them at night. But I never met Chris then. I did see him over at the Tally Ho Tavern that I would go to, but I didn't bother him. Years later, however, I did a story on Chris, a telephone interview, and he was in Hawaii where he and Lisa live. But it was about a new record he was putting out. And they offered an interview, and I said, sure, I'd love to take that. And so I did that interview, and he liked it so much that after it came out that they called me and said next time they're in Nashville, they'd like to spend some time with me. Chris would like time with me. Well, the next time he was in Nashville was he came for June Cash's funeral, but he didn't have any free time then. But the Cash funeral, he was in town, and he came back for Cash tribute. And of course, he was the eulogist for John, and so we had contacted over email that when he was in town that time, they were going to be here for a week or so. So maybe we could figure out a time. And so I sent a note to Chris and Lisa, that his wife, that anytime I'm available. And she called me and said, how about Sunday afternoon? You can do Sunday afternoon coming down. And so I wanted to take Chris. He hadn't been to Music Row in the daytime in 30 years. Of course, he'd gone to Hollywood, and he'd become the big matinee star. And then, of course, a lot of B movies too, but he did a lot of movies. He was in Hollywood and came through Nashville, but he'd not been in the daytime on Music Row at all. So I decided if he wanted to go, I'd take him. So we walked. He and his son Johnny, who was 16 at the time. Johnny wanted to do a school, since his dad was going to do that and talk about Old Music Row with me, which was the premise of our meeting. Johnny wanted to come along and do a video project for his high school because he never heard these stories from his dad. So we went down to Music Row, just parked right in front of where he used to live. Of course, it was a condo now, but where he used to live. And we just got out and we walked around there, and he went to the old. It was the old CBS, the old Columbia studio. It's still there. It's Sony, I guess now. But anyways, and he was trying to get in and all that stuff. That's where he used to clean ashtrays. Tally-Ho Tavern was long gone. There's a curb building there now. I used to in the Tally-Ho Tavern. So what we did is we stood outside of where the Tally-Ho used to be, and we sang arm in arm. And it was kind of like instantaneous. It was like, yeah, we got to do this. And we hit it off so well. It wasn't like we weren't, even at that point, we weren't strangers. So arm in arm, we sang The Silver-Tongued Devil. And I did stumble on some lyrics, but that's like you're singing with your hero. You're not going to actually think, well, geez, I hope I'm doing okay. And so I did stumble a little bit, and he looked at me, not mad. He looked at me. I got back on track, okay. So anyway, he did say on my book, this was the greatest blurb I got from anybody. Well, they all were great. But Chris said, Tim is a wordsmith unlike any other. We've shared some good times together, and he encapsulates those experiences as if they were yesterday. A truly gifted writer and friend. He's a wonderful man. He has had some health difficulties. He's not on the road anymore, but I do every couple of weeks. I don't hear back necessarily, but I do check in with Chris and Lisa, and then they do when they have the opportunity. His wife will send me a note back to let me know, or a video.
We got a couple of minutes left here, and I want to just run through. We got Chet Atkins, Mac Wiseman, Dixie and Tom T, Waylon, Grandpa Jones, Stonewall Jackson, Harold Bradley. You got to tell quickly in closing the story of you being thrown out of a festival, I think, and Charlie Daniels befriends you. And you didn't know Charlie Daniels.
Really, really quickly, I know these people all became my friends, which is why I wrote the book. They all became my friends, and so I had that in. But I'll tell you the Charlie story real quickly. Willie was doing a show up in Clarksville, and at that point, it was early in his outlaw career, and I wanted to go see Willie I was at the Clarksville paper, so I was going to review the concert, and I kept on getting thrown out by the Sound 70. Guys would not let me in, even though I had arranged for a pass. And so finally I was at the back door trying to think, how do I get in to do this show? And so this big old fella, young man at that point, Charlie Daniels, big guy, with his big old hat that he wore, he throws his arm around me and he said, "What's the matter, son?" And I said, "Well, I'm not getting in there." He said, "Well, you just come on with me." And so we opened the door, and he said, and the Sound 70 guy came over. Like, he looked really angry, and Charlie said, "This is my friend Tim. He's with me." So Charlie walked me in, got me a good seat right by the stage, and so ever since, that's another case where a French, every time I'd call Charlie about something over the years, I'd say, "Charlie, I still owe you for getting me in to see that show."
That's in chapter 12, by the way. Tim Ghianni, thanks for coming to see us.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it very much.
And sharing these great stories. The book is called Pilgrims, Pickers, and Honky-Tonk Heroes.
The boy said, "My name's Johnny, and it might be a sin, but I'll take your bet you're going to regret."
Thanks for listening to the Coffee, Country, and Cody podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And please leave us a 5-star review. This podcast was produced through the facilities of WSM Radio in Nashville, Tennessee. The hosts of Coffee, Country, and Cody are Bill Cody, Charlie Matos, and Kelly Sutton. Producer Eric Markham. WSM General Manager and Director of Content and Programming, J. Patrick Tittle. Copyright 2023. Opry Entertainment Group Holdings, LLC.